And welcome back, everyone. I'm late on the Zanpakuto video. I apologize for that. But to make up for it, I'm actually going to put out my what if for tomorrow today because I'm going to be busy tomorrow. So with that being said, from S. Sam, we asked the question of what is the Zanpakuto of Whis? Now keep in mind, while we look, because I've had some recent viewers to this series, kind of misunderstand the idea of a Zanpakuto. We're not trying to convert their abilities into a Zanpakuto. We're looking at who they are personally, the type of mentality they bring to the table, the type of, almost spirituality that comes with them, who they are as a person. What is that representative of in an ability, and translate that into the ability. You as a Zanpakuto. Now, with that being said, there are definitely arguments to be made and certain, exceptions to the rule where, yeah, you can still have someone, what's the best way to put it? Someone's abilities translate to a Zanpakuto, but it has to be connected to them on like a like personal, spiritual, soul like level. So does Whis qualify for that? Well, not really, but because he's an now granted, if we were to put him into the Bleach world, I don't know if we could say he's an angel, but the fact that there are probably something akin to demons in the hell of Bleach, we could say he might be akin to something similar to an angel. Maybe not an actual angel, but if we were to have him as a character in Bleach, an angel-like character. So I think that's still doable. At least on some level. I also foresee that if we did a world with him and other characters of fiction in the world, he'd actually be a member of the Royal Guard. Because for due to whatever contribution he might have made, but also he'd be pretty powerful. His personality, his demeanor, all translates to a Keto type Zanpakuto. Keto type individuals tend to be a lot more intellectual. I'm just doing this for not just for like fun, but also for a reason. More calm individuals, more intellectual individuals, individuals with a little bit more, not personality, that's not the right word, but they're actually able to be a little bit more not altruistic. Be able to kind of see things a bit more. No, that's not the right word either. But keto experts tend to be or keto type Zanpakuto specialists tend to be more on the intelligence side, and I mean like highly intelligent, have a good head on their shoulders, be less aggressive. Also, that's another way. They're less battle hungry in many ways, and Whis is certainly not battle hungry. Sealed form would be a katana, although that's with most. I think yes, the sealed form could still be a katana, but ultimately I think it's actually more akin to something like what Ichibei has. Ichibei's Ichimonji takes the form of a brush. What I think this takes the form of is a blue staff type cane with a blade at the end. Now its release would be Brighten. Now its name would be Silver Pool. Its Bankai's Shining Whirlpool Silver Stroke. Now, why do I use Brighten? Well, sometimes the release really has nothing to do with the name of the Zanpakuto. It's just a release. I just like the term Brighten. For some reason, I like the idea of his spirit being like a little animal. A winged kind of almost like angelic little ferret. That's maybe like blue and yellow or something like that. Goldish silver. And the form the Zanpakuto states, this is actually really why I was enlarging it, would be his personal staff. I think this is what in Shikai the staff looks like. Should note, the translating name for this would be Ginpuro, which would be Silver Pool, or Kagagyaku Uzu Gin no Suchi, or Bankai. Now, what does this Zanpakuto actually do? Well, because of the nature of being the nature of angels, being basically natural users of Ultra Instinct, him having a lot of abilities, including the ability to literally, manipulate time, reverse things, accelerate things. What I ultimately chose for the ability is an ability similar to something I've done before with Zanpakuto, but not one-to-one exact. And that's the ability to revert something back to a previous state. Now, I have done this similarly before, and I can't keep track of every Zanpakuto I've done. Well, technically I've written it down, but realistically I can't keep track of everything. But what I kind of foresee in this Zanpakuto is literally, unlike on an earlier Zanpakuto I did a few weeks ago, where it kind of separates things into its base components, this Zanpakuto literally reverts something back to a previous state. For example, water doesn't start necessarily as water. It starts back as oxygen, hydrogen. That's the previous state of, well, technically that's just a different form of water. So where does the water return to? If someone say splashing an attack of water, well, or I'm trying to think of a perfect example within nature. So if he tapped a tree, the tree would revert back to a seed. If you return, and then ironically, if you were to tap a seed, it would revert back to either a flower or a bud or something like that, so forth and so on. In theory, there's an infinite loop you could do with reverting something back to its base components or to its previous state. Some things have only a starting point. Other things have literally a continuous cycle. So how does this really make sense, say, in combat? And by the way, he would have to tap the object or opponent with the orb of the spear for it to use the effect. Let's say, for example, that he's fighting against a giant hollow. Well, he literally could just tap the hollow. Whatever the previous state of that hollow was, if it was, say, a Voster Lorde, it would be a Juha. If it was like, say, a Juhas, it'd be a Menos Grande. If it was Menos Grande, it'd be a Menos. In theory, he could undo the holification of something into a base spirit. And in theory still, he could turn a soul back into a living being. And then he could turn them back into a child. Now the idea of this, I think, could have limitations, or if he's as powerful, say, like a Squad Zero individual could be, he could literally control how far back. Like, he could look at something, and, if he looks at, say, an opponent, like, I wonder, how old are you? It's like, I'm this many years old. It's like, now you're this many. Now you're this many. Now you're this many. In theory, he could do that. But I would imagine on the whole, like, say if this was him learning his abilities, he wouldn't be able to control it indefinitely. But furthermore, against, say, if he's fighting a Shinigami, or a Quincy and a Voster Lorde, a Volstandage, reverting back to before the Volstandage. Someone releases their Shikai or the Bankai, tap the Bankai or the Shikai, revert it back to the Shikai or the sealed state. Hell, in theory, he can revert a Zanpakuto into just a Ahucha, not Ahucha. Oh God, what is the name of? It's not Ahucha. That's one second. Zanpakuto. Zanpakuto. What's Asaushi? That's it, Asaushi. He can revert it back to the Asaushi. This does partly stem from the idea, from his ability to, like, reverse time to a certain degree, but it also would stand as the defensive capability. He's not offensively doing anything. He's simply tapping something and an effect is happening. Now, the Bankai of this would essentially be boom, and basically a giant, it would just be area of effect. Like, he was basically surrounded in a giant sphere, and he has to, that would be one of the catches though. He can't be on a solid surface, because the solid surface would revert back to a previous state if he's not careful. And if he stays on that previous surface, well, on that state, it's just going to revert into nothing, and there'd be no point. He's like, man, we've had to change the floor so many times because of this. This would be one of the most broken Zanpakutos in Bleach, hands down. That's the reason I suggest that he would be a Squad Zero member in his own version of Bleach, where, we don't have our Ichibes or whatever, because that's the level of power you're dealing with a character like this. Ichimonji is very similar to this, where it is literally affecting concepts as a whole. Now, this Zanpakuto still wouldn't be infallible. Again, it's still a Ryatsu battle. In theory, a strong enough opponent could theoretically usurp this. Also, as deadly as that Shikai is, it's only on the orb. And that orb is floating. If you could somehow separate the orb from the staff and just basically kind of keep it separate, he's got nothing to, he can't even go Bankai. I think that would be actually a real good way to keep this Zanpakuto from being the absolute most broken, is the fact that orb is floating separate. Now, it moves in tandem with the staff, but in theory, you could knock that thing off the staff and then basically catch it. If it's not floating on the staff, it doesn't have the power to revert things back to a previous state. And so if you're holding it, if you take the risk of, like, using your sword, go to Shikai, reverts it back to its sealed form, but then grab the orb if you know the weakness of it, and then hold on to it, you can then fight Whis without any real risk of that. Now, granted, Whis as a Royal Guard captain would still be probably a Master Keto user, Master Hand-to-Hand Combatant, Master Swordsmith, but you get my point. Is that this, I think, is a really good weakness for the Shikai. The Shikai has no range. It is only the orb that does the reverting. The Bankai, on the other hand, that would be really tricky to figure out a way around. Now, what you could, if there's, say, an ability that acts on visuals, like, say, Katen Kyokatsu, sorry, Katen, not Katen Kyokatsu, Katen, Kyokatsu Igetsu. I always get those two confused. Kyokatsu Igetsu is absolute hypnosis. Whis would not have any advantages over that. Same with, say, Suzumushi Enma Kurogi. He wouldn't have. So it's as strong and as broken as the Zanpakuto is. There are ways around the Zanpakuto. It's not infallible, but it would still be pretty broken in a cool type of Zanpakuto. Now, you could also make the argument that maybe instead of maybe the Shikai does the, or maybe the Bankai does the opposite. Instead of reverting things to a previous state, it goes to a future state. Hence, because Whis also was able to manipulate when Bulma's baby was going to come. So he can control time to some degree. And, I mean, that would actually make some sense. It's the more offensive capability in theory. So, I mean, either way, I like either or of these. Like, I could even see Bankai, and it just doesn't change. Maybe the color of the ring goes from blue to red. Maybe that'd be kind of, actually, that'd be funny. It's like, so your Bankai is the ring turns red. That's it. Yes. Although, to be honest, I'm much more positive of the color blue myself. And so, yeah, and basically, it kind of act like Respira in that way, where it's basically just against someone, it could just age them up. Now, Shikai could force Bankai, but what happens when Bankai happens? I mean, in theory, it just returns the Bankai all the way back to the sealed state, because usually when you use a Bankai, it just reverts back to back to its sealed form. So, I mean, in theory, because Zanpakuto don't age, technically. Now, that being said, yeah, Akito still ages, we know that. So again, it can pretty much just stop something or just revert something. Like Yamamoto's old. How much older could you get Yamamoto? So I don't know. I like both ideas. I actually kind of like the reverting things to a future state more than the previous one. But I don't know. Which one do you prefer for the Bankai? Just the expanding the ability to an actual field that you just can't be touched in, a passive ability like, say, what Whis would basically do, or a slightly more offensive version of the ability where you revert something to a future state, or accelerate something to a future state. Let me know which one you prefer. I think I actually like the accelerate thing more. Anyway, I digress, though. That's just my thoughts on what I would do with a Zanpakuto. Let me know if you like this or you do something different. Until then, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.